and it's like, okay. But if you don't see colour, you're not seeing that person and their lived experiences and how the world does tend to perceive them. Just because you as an individual might not see colour, that doesn't mean that the world does not see colour, and that the colour does not affect the way that they live.
Call me crazy, but I just don't see race. I guess I'm just the least racist person here.
Okay. Race is like often like a pretty obvious thing to observe. It's not like racist to notice.
I had to laugh. Zach, my goodness, I only see one race.
Ugh.
The human race.
Hi. Welcome back to Background Voice. It has been a while. It's been a year, so sorry about that. I posted 2 YouTube videos with the intention of doing weekly uploads and kind of just fell off of that. I have been, during this year, researching on different topics that I would really like to discuss, writing scripts, and now I'm sitting back in front of this camera and trying to convey the information that I found in a digestible, interesting way for people to watch and learn as well. I'm still kind of working out the vibe that I want to go for, so as you can see, I've kind of switched things up with the location. Maybe the editing style might change as well. I'm still figuring all of that out, still trying to work out equipment as well that works, so hopefully the sound quality and video quality will be good. I'm sorry if it's not, just give me time and I'll work it out. So this channel is just here for me to talk about the different topics that I find really interesting, mostly topics that affect me as a Tamil that is born and raised here in the UK, and my journey to explore my culture, understand different aspects of the culture and my history as well. And I just thought it'd be really nice to share that, and not just Tamil culture, but maybe South Asian culture in general, and the history as well behind certain topics associated with race and our lives as a minority community where we are not, well, the majority, because we're a minority. So yeah, hopefully you'll stick around, hopefully you'll subscribe and like this channel, and we'll get into today's first topic. So I have my notes here. Hopefully I won't be reading off of them too much and be able to just let the words flow. I am not used to sitting in front of the camera at all. It's not something that I usually do, so we'll see how this goes. But I wanted to talk about the default and what we consider normal in society. We tend to say certain names are normal while others are not. We tend to say certain foods are normal while others are strange and exotic. And we tend to say certain cultural practices are normal while others are strange. So we do have this idea of a default from which we tend to judge everything else, and if it deviates a little too much, it's exotic, it's strange, it's weird, or it's just different. And anything that fits the standards of what we consider normal is then our default, and that's also what we tend to just expect to be the norm. That's what we expect to always be there. And here in the West, what we consider normal and what we consider as the default is pretty clear. So, the whiteness theory. It looks at how whiteness is invisible, and it's basically, because of its invisibility, it's also considered the norm. Yet despite this invisibility, it's still associated with some forms of racial privilege. Though one thing to be noted is whiteness theory shouldn't be mixed up with white privilege. Those are 2 separate things. So when I say racial privilege, what I mean is, well, what Wikipedia means is, whiteness is taken as a default, which allows those who lie within the default and are not branching out and learning for themselves to remain blind to both the advantages and disadvantages to cultural subjectiveness towards whiteness. So in simple terms, people that aren't white or wouldn't kind of fit into what we consider as white would usually experience more stereotypes about themselves, and they would essentially stick out when in a normal Western community. And because of this, they can be viewed through a more biased lens because they stick out and there are stereotypes associated with them. And as whiteness, or I would say more accurately European culture, is the standard to which a lot of these other cultures are compared, the whiteness itself becomes a default. Whiteness theory establishes whiteness as default, through which social, political, and economic complications arise from whiteness and its creation of colourblindness. So, ideologies, social norms, and behaviours associated with white culture, usually, once again, European-based cultures, and that also includes like European Americans, that becomes the comparative standards to which a lot of other races are compared. And with a lot of these topics, you'll find that there is some history that's rooted in the colonial period. So back then, during colonization, when a lot of these minority communities were being colonized, they were taught that European culture and whiteness was something that they should aspire to, and they should change their cultures, change their ideologies in order to fit in with a Eurocentric ideology. But of course, no matter how much they tried to be white, they would of course never be white. They would just be an imitation. And they tend to be otherized, they tend to be also sometimes looked down upon, and certain practices are then considered backwards. Just because, once again, we have this standard that we've set as a default based on Eurocentric ideologies. And of course, it's not something that's limited to ideologies. It's something that we can see in like casting of characters, representation of characters, what we also expect when it comes to representation in society with high profile members of the public, whether they be political leaders or celebrities, musicians, etc. There is always a subtle undertone of whiteness as being the default and what we expect these people to look like and behave like, and the idea that, for example, if they are a political leader in the West, how a lot of what we consider as professional is based on European culture. And this othering and this default is not limited to ideologies. Of course, like I mentioned at the beginning, things like food, names, but also how we have media representation of different ethnicities and the casting of certain characters as well. And I'll do a whole other video on media representation just because there's so much I can say, and I'll be honest, I don't think I have a fully formed thought on it. I see both perspectives of why we might want to recast certain characters as, you know, a person of colour, but then also why are we recasting? Why don't we just create a new character altogether and have a character that's more in line with the cultural identity of, you know, the race that we're putting in to that character. So, I mean, there's so much to go on about with that particular topic, and I don't think I've got a clear and concise enough argument or thought process to do that right here in this particular video.
someone because of their skin color. To me, true diversity is diversity of thought, not diversity of color. I don't see color. I go after Hillary Clinton and she is white as they come.
You don't see color. So what do you do at a traffic light? I don't believe in that at all. When people say that, there's nothing wrong with seeing color. It's how you treat color that's more important.
So one argument that we tend to hear a lot of the time when it comes to the default and when people mention race is, I don't see colour. I've personally heard this particular phrase used a lot when people are talking about their experiences as someone of colour, as someone from a minority ethnic group, and their experiences with racism or, you know, just microaggressions. And I will sometimes hear people go, well, I don't see colour. And it's like, okay, but if you don't see colour, you're not seeing that person and their lived experiences and how the world does tend to perceive them. Just because you as an individual might not see colour, that doesn't mean that the world does not see colour, and that the colour does not affect the way that they live. And I personally really don't like this phrase because I think it deflects. It tries to kind of push all the work and the effort off of an individual to actually be anti-racist and do research and do understand and look into understanding the experiences of those who are not white. Because like I said, for example with me, being brown does dictate how the world sees me. It changes how the world perceives me and how I perceive the world. Where I feel safe, where I don't feel safe, where I feel like I can completely be myself and where I feel like I need to assimilate. And by not seeing my colour, by erasing a big part of my identity, what do I become? What is my default? Will I become a fellow white person as well? Because by erasing the colour of a person's skin, is also erasing their lived experiences because of their skin. But actually it doesn't, because they still have experienced that because of their skin and because of a characteristic that they've just been born with and they have to deal with, and they can't really do anything about it. So the problem doesn't actually go away. Those experiences don't actually go away. It's just sort of masking it. So let's look into the research and the actual information and facts out there on colour blindness. In racial colour blindness, emergence, I can't remember the name of it. In the study Racial Colour Blindness, Emergence, Practice and Implications by Evan et al., it is written, colour blindness is rooted in the belief that racial group membership and race-based differences should not be taken into account. When decisions are made, impressions are formed and behaviours are enacted. The logic underlying the belief that colour blindness can prevent prejudice and discrimination is straightforward. If people or institutions do not even notice race, then they cannot act in a racially biased manner. This notion that colour blindness has the capacity to short-circuit the typical processes by which bias emerges was epitomised by US Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts' opinion in a 2007 case involving a local school district's effort to achieve diversity. The way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. In the conclusion, this particular study goes on to say, colour blindness is far from panacea, sometimes representing more of an obstacle than an asset to facilitate constructive race relations and equitable race-related policies. You see, despite the fact that race does technically not exist, at least not scientifically or biologically, that doesn't erase the fact that there are still experiences that people have had that are different because of these physical characteristics that they cannot change about themselves. And that has led to a long history, hundreds and hundreds of years of persecution, of discrimination, of dehumanization that is still continuing to this day. Maybe not in the same way that it was back then, back when we had slavery and colonization, but there are still policies and laws and systems in place that do still make it very difficult for certain racial groups to live a life of equality where they are viewed as equal and are able to have access to the same opportunities. Also, these scientific findings are often ignored, or if they are not ignored, they can be actively misinterpreted or misused in order to push forward certain racist agendas. So when I was researching for this topic as well, I was of course looking into studies and articles that were out there, and something that I came across actually, was the fact that white people are very rarely the subject when it comes to research on racial socialization, which, you know, if we're looking at race, surely they should also be included in these studies in order to compare the experiences, and to see, you know, what different races are experiencing from the same, you know, system or situation that they're being put into for whichever study it may be. There have also been a very large body of studies conducted on how parents of a lot of these racial minorities teach their children about race and their experiences and what they kind of can expect to happen to them. Essentially preparing them for a world which is going to possibly put those physical characteristics before looking at the character of the child itself. But when I was doing research, so after seeing, you know, those bodies of studies, I tried to look at what there was on white people and how they prepare their children for the world and how their race can possibly be perceived by the rest of the world, and how that might affect their experiences in life. And I mean, I didn't find anything. There might be some stuff, but I didn't find a single thing. But I did find an article that actually later discussed how white people are not considered in these particular studies. And from researchers, this silence within, you know, the research community reflects the idea that white people don't have race because there's no racial experience to research. And in this article, she said, among the 52 white parents who participated in my 2014 to 2015 study, most also viewed themselves and their children as raceless. This was best evidenced when I asked parents if they spoke with their children about being white. Without fail, parents responded with an expression of shocked dismay and then emphatically stated, "No, what is there to say?" White parents' surprised responses underscore how whiteness and white privilege are often invisible to white people. In contrast to the silence many white people adopt with respect to their own racial identity, parents of colour proactively speak with their children about their racial identity. The goal of these discussions is to instill in their children a sense of racial pride, because parents of colour understand that their children will seldom be presented with positive or celebratory imagery of their racial groups growing up. Instead, they will be confronted with images that position African Americans as criminals, Asians as perpetual foreigners, and Latinos as illegal immigrants. So, what can we do? From my research, and also from my personal opinion, teaching multiculturalism is really important because it puts these ethnic groups that are usually in the background, usually considered not the default, not the norm. It brings them forward and it gives them essentially center stage to talk about their culture, talk about the reasoning behind why they might do certain things. It's so important to understand the different cultures out there and the different ideas that are out there because there are so many countries in the world, and even within each of those countries there are so many different cultures. Like take India for example, there are, I don't even know how many cultures in India, but everyone's different, and everyone has a different experience and a different view on life. And I do think a lot of the time people are scared of the unknown. People are scared of what they don't understand. So by teaching multiculturalism and making that, something that everyone has to be educated on, it takes away that unknown aspect, and therefore hopefully takes away the fear as well. Especially because a lot of the time people who aren't taught about multiculturalism and who aren't exposed to people of different cultures, the only representation they have of people that aren't within their immediate circle will come from media. And a lot of the time media does have negative stereotypes. So, or even when it comes to the news, certain stories are pushed on about certain groups. Research has demonstrated that multiculturalism offers a variety of benefits, from fostering appreciation for other people's perspectives to sharpening assessments of discrimination. For instance, Todd and Galinsky found that individuals exposed to a multicultural message, as opposed to a colourblind message, subsequently demonstrated heightened perspective-taking tendencies, underscored by efforts to understand other people better by actively imagining their point of view. Basically, there are options. There are so many options that aren't the colourblind option. There are so many different paths that people can take that sure are not the easiest path to take, but I really don't think we should be lazy in this day and age when we have so many cultures coming together. We have the opportunity to travel and experience and to see different perspectives, because learning about multiculturalism and expanding our view of different cultures helps shift our world perspective to be one that's more representative of what's actually out there. Of course, things aren't going to change overnight. A lot of these issues that we have with, the default is ingrained in society, ingrained in our thought patterns, ingrained in our systems. So it is something that, we do need to work bit by bit to change, but there is also responsibility on each individual to do their own research, whether it be to watch YouTube channels from people from different countries where they discuss their experiences, or reading books, or if, people can travel, see the world, speak to people of from different communities, especially because we do now live in a time where it's so easy to be connected to people from around the world, and it's so easy to get information from people around the world as well. So, even though it seems like it's a lot of effort, it really isn't. It's something that can easily be done from home if that's the only option that some people have. But that's what's on my mind. What do you think?